Imagine for a second
Yeah.
that the internet is just completely weaponized against you.
Right.
And I'm not talking about some, anonymous hacker halfway across the world trying to guess your passwords or steal your credit card information.
Like a random phishing scam.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm talking about a scenario where the attacker is someone who actually knows you, someone who knows your deepest, most personal vulnerabilities and just decides to systematically target them.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
But what happens when the target of this attack isn't just an average person, but an internationally recognized top-tier cybersecurity expert?
Oh, that completely changes the game.
Right. A professional whose entire livelihood and, market value are built entirely on digital trust.
It creates a highly unusual and deeply revealing dynamic. Because usually when someone faces a targeted harassment campaign, the response is emotional.
Of course.
People get defensive, they post angry rebuttals online, they try to argue their case in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, they fire off a bunch of tweets.
Exactly. But in this situation, because of the target-specific background, the response was entirely different. We are looking at a defense built on cryptographically secured, mathematically verifiable, objective data.
I love that. It makes me think of how we diagnose physical injuries. Like, if you fall and break a bone, you don't just argue with the doctor about whether it hurts.
Right. You go get an X-ray.
You get an X-ray. And the X-ray reveals the objective truth of the fracture underneath the skin. In the digital world, metadata is that X-ray. And that is exactly what we are exploring today.
Spot on.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our objective is to provide a complete, impartial overview of a highly complex, truly transnational conflict between an Uruguayan cybersecurity specialist named Alberto Daniel Hill and his former partner, Suvi Hill, who operates under the digital alias CyberGirl10.
And we need to be extremely precise with you, the listener, about the foundation of today's analysis.
Yes, absolutely.
We are not pulling from gossip or social media speculation here. We are working directly from a massive stack of formal documentation.
The primary source, right?
Right. The core of this is the Comprehensive Forensic Analysis and Transnational Risk Report. Cyberstalking, identity fixation, and regulatory communication impediments.
That is a mouthful.
It is, but it's incredibly thorough. And alongside that primary report, we're looking through a huge dossier of legal memos, clinical psychiatric and medical records, and raw digital forensic logs.
And before we really get into the weeds here, I want to make something very, very clear to you listening. We are making a strict neutrality pledge right now.
Crucial point.
We are not here to take sides, and we are certainly not here to pass moral judgment on the, interpersonal relationship between these two individuals.
Right, that's not our job.
Exactly. Our goal is strictly to objectively report on the clinical evidence, the legal filings, and the psychological behavioral patterns that are actually documented in the source material. We want to assess the true severity of this situation based purely on the data provided to us.
Precisely. We are looking at the metadata, the legal statutes across multiple European and South American jurisdictions.
Which is wild, by the way.
It really is. And the clinical realities documented by medical professionals, we're examining the facts exactly as they are recorded in these institutional protocols.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp how this situation escalated into a full-blown international legal conflict, we need to understand the foundational background of the two primary actors.
Their profiles essentially dictate exactly how this conflict unfolded.
Right. So let's start with the claimant, Alberto Daniel Hill. The documents describe him as a top 1% to 3% elite cybersecurity expert in Latin America.
His professional background is extensive. It's highly specialized.
Yeah.
The files note he's a former Interpol forensic examiner.
Wow.
Yeah. And he has previously worked as a digital forensic examiner for the Supreme Court of Uruguay. Plus, he's an author. He wrote a book called Log Into Hell, and he hosts the Cyber Midnight Club.
So he's not just some guy with a computer.
Not at all. In the international ethical hacking and information security community, he is a known, verified entity.
But his background has a very specific documented chapter that makes him incredibly vulnerable in this exact context, doesn't it?
It does. The forensic reports and the clinical records detail that Alberto is the survivor of a wrongful imprisonment ordeal back in Uruguay.
Right.
The files describe it as an unjust criminalization of ethical hacking, where he was targeted after reporting vulnerabilities in medical systems.
And the clinical documentation regarding the aftermath of that event is just severe.
Heartbreaking, really.
Yeah. The medical records provided by Dr. Luis Rodriguez at the Hospital Evangelico in Montevideo, they confirm that Alberto suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Alongside major depressive disorder.
Exactly, stemming directly from that period of systemic extortion and imprisonment. And to give you an idea of the clinical severity here, the records actually note this trauma previously resulted in a stress-induced, medically induced coma.
So his baseline vulnerability is exceptionally high.
Right. So if you're putting yourself in his shoes, he goes through this profound, life-altering trauma, survives it, and then has to painstakingly rebuild his entire life and career.
From the ground up.
From the ground up. And according to the documents, he rebuilds his professional capital on a philosophy he calls radical transparency.
Which is key to this whole case.
Exactly. Everything he does in his professional life is documented out in the open, relying entirely on objective truth and verifiable data to protect himself from ever being, falsely accused again.
Which brings us to the respondent in this case.
Right.
She is identified in the institutional registries under several names: Suvi Hill, Suvi Kotaranta, and Suvi Kaipainen.
Okay.
She is a Finnish national but currently residing in Brussels, Belgium. In the digital space, she operates primarily under the handle CyberGirl10.
CyberGirl10, right.
But the forensic logs also track her using aliases like at 010000011G and at Skaterina Hill.
And the background the dossier provides on her current life situation is, well, it's crucial to understanding the catalyst of all this.
It's the spark.
Yeah. She is entangled in what the documents describe as a highly contentious, high-conflict custody battle with her ex-husband, a man named Pekka Kotaranta, who the files note is a former police officer.
Right.
So she's a single mother dealing with immense chronic stress from these international custody issues, complex documentation problems across Finland, Belgium, and Europe as a whole.
And she uses her online presence, specifically what she refers to as her online fam, as a sort of resilience journal to cope with her reality.
And that precise dynamic sets the stage for what the behavioral briefing in our source material categorizes as the CyberGirl10 paradox.
What's fascinating here is how the clinical and psychological assessments frame this.
Yeah. Explain that paradox to us.
Well, the clinical analysts who prepared the behavioral paradoxes in digital and domestic conflict briefing focused on a profound, almost inexplicable disparity between how Suvi reacted to two completely different isolated events.
Okay, let's walk through those events, starting with event A, because this is wild.
It really is.
According to the cross-border minor subtraction logs and the behavioral analysis, Suvi's ex-husband, Pekka Kotaranta, allegedly smuggled their 11-year-old daughter across European sovereign borders.
Specifically, the documents state the child was moved from Belgium into France.
Right. And the context of this transit is what makes it so critical.
Absolutely. The files state this border crossing occurred during an active Level 3 terrorism threat in the region.
A Level 3 terror threat.
Yes. Furthermore, the child was moved without a valid passport, without a national identity card, and without the mandatory maternal and administrative authorizations required by European law for a minor to cross borders.
I really want to pause on that for a second because it is so easy to just hear border crossing and not realize the gravity of it.
Oh, it's massive.
The report says this lack of documentation rendered the child legally invisible to border tracking mechanisms like the European entry-exit system.
Invisible.
Right. During a terror threat, if something happens, the authorities literally have no record of this child existing in that country.
And under Belgian law, the analysts categorize this as international parental child abduction,
Which is a serious felony.
carrying a potential 5 to 10 years of mandatory imprisonment.
The structural and physical risk to the child in that specific scenario was immense. Yet the documented response from Suvi, the mother, was passive acceptance.
The behavioral briefing explicitly notes she met her ex-husband's multi-layered international felony with absolute passivity and silence.
It's unbelievable.
She actively shielded her ex-husband for exposure and did not launch any kind of public outcry or legal emergency response.
So you had to stop you there. How does someone ignore a massive international felony involving their own child? A situation that literally leaves their daughter legally invisible and vulnerable during a terror threat. But then we look at event B, and the reaction is completely opposite.
It's a complete 180.
In event B, the documents show Alberto sets a simple 5-minute boundary on a phone call with her. It's a basic, I only have 5 minutes to talk, relational boundary. And her documented response to that is to launch a massive, relentless, public humiliation and defamation campaign against him across multiple social networks.
Yes.
What is the analytical explanation for this? Is this just a messy breakup, or is there a specific psychological mechanism at work here?
Well, the source material is very clear that framing this as merely a messy breakup is highly inaccurate.
Okay.
The psychological assessments introduce the concepts of the strength model of self-control, ego depletion, and displaced aggression.
Ego depletion. Can you give us an ELI 5, explain, I'm 5 on how that actually functions in a person's brain?
Certainly. Think of your cognitive and emotional regulation as a physical muscle, or, perhaps a battery.
A battery, okay.
Every time you have to manage a crisis, suppress intense emotions, or navigate a high-stress environment, you draw power from that battery.
Makes sense.
The theory of ego depletion outlines a state where an individual's emotional resources are completely exhausted by an ongoing, chronic stressor.
And for Suvi.
In Suvi's case, her battery was drained to zero by the relentless, high-conflict international custody battle with her ex-husband, combined with those complex documentation issues across European borders.
So basically, because all her psychological energy is tied up in surviving this custody war, she essentially has no emotional shock absorbers left.
Precisely. She lacks the self-control reserves to regulate her emotions when a second, even minor stressor occurs.
Ah.
Instead of confronting the actual dangerous threat, the ex-husband who allegedly smuggled her undocumented child, which is a deeply intimidating and legally complex fight, she redirects all that unresolved trauma, chronic stress, and rage onto a different target.
She redirects it onto Alberto.
Yes. The briefing calls this a textbook case of cyber displacement of domestic aggression.
Wow.
Alberto, a man already carrying the heavy psychological vulnerability of his wrongful imprisonment PTSD, became the accessible, psychologically safe target.
Because he's not the one she's in a legal custody war with.
Exactly. She couldn't control her ex-husband, but she felt she could control or punish Alberto. So she weaponized a minor relational boundary, that 5-minute phone call limit, to unleash a widespread public campaign. The clinical reports term this a relational betrayal.
And the report points out a really tragic irony in this displacement, doesn't it?
It really does.
By ignoring the physical, real-world danger to her child, but attacking Alberto publicly, she actually ensured that her minor child's private trauma was permanently archived in the public digital record.
Yes.
She used the private details of her daughter's undocumented situation as a public prop to try and damage Alberto's reputation.
The analysts conclude this reflects a behavioral prioritization. The need for redirected vengeance completely superseded the consistent safety and privacy of her child.
It represents a profound behavioral dissonance.
Absolutely.
But while understanding why she attacked is crucial from a psychological standpoint to establish motive, understanding how she executed the attack is where this analysis shifts from a clinical evaluation into a severe transnational legal investigation.
Which brings us to the actual anatomy of this asymmetric digital assault.
Right, because this wasn't just someone sending a few angry private text messages. The forensic dossier breaks down exactly how Suvi weaponized what the analysts call high-trust digital spaces.
We are talking about professional platforms, specifically LinkedIn and X.
And that distinction of high-trust spaces is critical, right?
Very. These are environments where professional reputations, market value, and commercial viability are built and destroyed.
Especially in Alberto's field.
Yes, in the cybersecurity industry in particular, verifiable trust and absolute integrity are the core currency.
Right. Nobody hires a forensic expert they don't trust.
Exactly. The documents define this specific tactic as being mathematically designed to maximize social and professional damage to the target, all while allowing the attacker to remain shielded behind a curated digital persona.
So what exactly did she broadcast into these high-trust spaces?
Well, the forensic logs document that she publicly and repeatedly branded Alberto a cocaine user.
A cocaine user.
Yes. And she didn't just post this into the void. She explicitly tagged his professional network and industry peers.
Oh, wow. So she was making sure his colleagues saw it.
Yes. She also falsely accused him, and inexplicably his elderly mother, of being romance scammers.
His mother, too.
Yes. She took his professional credentials, images of his published books, references to his forensic reports, and juxtaposed them with text framing him as a severe drug addict and a financial criminal.
And this is where we start looking at legal statutes. The legal memos in our sources highlight this specific methodology as clear evidence of premeditated malice.
In legal terms, specifically within the reference jurisdictions, this demonstrates dolo directo, or direct intent.
Direct intent.
By actively acknowledging his high-level expertise while simultaneously publishing statements aimed at destroying his commercial market value, the analysts conclude she demonstrated full awareness of his professional status and a clear, calculated intent to cause commercial harm.
But here is where Alberto's foundational philosophy of radical transparency completely intercepts the assault.
Yes, it does.
Because the comprehensive forensic analysis doesn't just record that Alberto said, no, I didn't do that. It provides objective, clinical, immutable proof.
Let's look at the cocaine user claim first.
Yeah, let's look at that. The dossier contains what are called certified clinical toxicological blood panels.
These are objective, medically administered laboratory tests.
Right. And what do they show?
They confirm completely clean, negative toxicology results for Alberto Hill.
Boom.
In a forensic setting, these tests factually and irrefutably invalidate the public labels of cocaine abuse. The labs showed zero traces of any illegal substances.
So the drug accusation is entirely dismantled by medical science.
Completely.
And then there's the romance scammer claim. Now, if you think about it, the definition of a scammer is someone who fraudulently takes money and deliberately refuses to pay it back.
Right.
But the forensic analyst preserved the raw, unaltered WhatsApp and Telegram chat logs between Alberto and Suvi.
And those preserved communication logs reveal a completely different narrative.
What do they show?
They show that Alberto continuously, persistently offered to pay his financial debt to her.
He never denied it.
He never denied his financial obligations. The original messaging contracts actually set payment terms conditional on his economic stability, but even stepping beyond those conditions, the logs prove he was actively and repeatedly trying to execute the transfer of funds.
Okay, wait. I need to understand this. If he is actively trying to pay her and he has the funds ready to go, why on earth is she publicly launching campaigns claiming he is a scammer refusing to pay unpaid debts?
This is where we get into a concept the files call regulatory compliance sabotage.
Regulatory compliance sabotage. I need you to break this down for me because it involves some dense international banking law, and it honestly sounds crazy.
It is a highly manipulative tactic. So, to wire thousands of euros across international borders, banking institutions are legally bound by strict regulations.
Right.
The documents specifically mention the Banco de la República Oriental del Uruguay, or BROU, alongside global wire processors. These institutions require strict anti-money laundering, or AML, documentation.
Right, because in 2026, you can't just send a massive anonymous wire transfer. The banks need to know exactly who the money is going to in order to prevent international fraud, tax evasion, or terrorist financing.
Exactly. The AML compliance frameworks legally require explicit destination identification data before they will release the funds.
So what does the sender actually have to provide?
This means the sender must provide a full legal passport name of the recipient, certified IBAN or BIC routing numbers, and exact co-holder variables.
And if they don't?
If the name on the account doesn't perfectly match the legal passport provided, the bank's compliance algorithms freeze the transaction entirely.
And the forensic records prove that Alberto repeatedly, transparently attempted to settle the obligation through these legally compliant channels. The chat logs show him asking her over and over for the mandatory AML routing data. He explicitly told her that his legal team and his bank needed her to provide this specific verification information so the money could legally cross the border.
But the institutional records show Suvi systematically refused to provide those standard identity verification documents.
She just said no.
She refused to provide a passport matching her claimed surname. She deliberately and repeatedly withheld the specific data required by international banking rules, thereby intentionally freezing the process.
It's like locking the bank doors from the inside, swallowing the key, and then standing at the window screaming to the public that the bank manager is a thief who refuses to give you your money.
That is a perfect analogy.
She actively, deliberately blocked the transaction from happening on a regulatory level and then turned around and used that blocked transaction as ammunition to publicly brand him a scammer.
The legal analysis describes it exactly that way. The report states she deliberately utilized the underlying financial transaction strictly as an instrument for toxic emotional tracking and coercion.
Wow.
It allowed her to maintain a public narrative of victimization, all while she was the one committing regulatory compliance sabotage. She controlled the impasse, but blamed the target.
And this conflict wasn't just a battle of digital words existing on screens. There was horrific, physical, human collateral.
Very real consequences.
Yeah, the extortion and the psychological terror bled out of the internet and directly into the real world, heavily targeting Alberto's family.
The clinical records provided by Dr. Emerald, an internal medicine specialist at the Hospital Evangelico, document the severe, devastating impact on Alberto's 73-year-old mother, Maria Gloria Antonioli.
His elderly mother.
Yes. The forensic files show Suvi utilized direct extortive threats against her. The logs document specific phrases sent to Alberto, such as, "What if I tell your mother about the money?"
Just threatening to drag a sick elderly woman into this. The clinical report states, this induced extreme psychological terror and acute physiological distress. It caused his mother, who was already dealing with pre-existing severe terminal illnesses, to suffer a massive physiological and neurological collapse.
The medical ledger is unequivocal on this point. It confirms that the acute stress generated by this targeted harassment directly forced his mother into full wheelchair immobility.
Wheelchair immobility.
Yes, the physical toll of the digital abuse was absolute, tangible, and catastrophic.
It's just devastating to read. And it proves that actions taken in digital spaces are not contained there. They have severe, measurable physical consequences on vulnerable people.
Definitely.
But the assault goes even further into bizarre, almost surreal territory. It wasn't just defamation. The documents detail a pathological manipulation of real-world identity. Let's look at the findings regarding identity fixation.
This brings us to a highly unusual variable detailed in the Italian authorities' report. During the active course of this conflict, Suvi legally changed her surname to Hill.
Okay, wait. Were they ever married?
No. The legal documents and institutional registries explicitly state there was never a marriage, nor was there any biological or legal kinship existing between them at any point.
None at all.
None. Yet, leveraging Finnish naming laws, she formally transitioned her legal name from Suvi Kaipainen, or Suvi Kotaranta, to Suvi Hill.
That is wild.
Following the legal change, she then adopted online aliases to match, utilizing handles like @Scatterina_Hill alongside her primary profile @Cybergirl10. She essentially bound her digital and legal identity to his family name.
How do the legal and psychological experts who authored the dossier interpret that? Because, if you just hear that someone changed their name, it might seem weird, maybe eccentric, but perhaps not inherently criminal. How does the context change the evaluation here?
Well, the clinical and behavioral assessments frame this action as highly pathological. They do not interpret this as a routine legal name change.
Right.
They classify it as an extreme, obsessive manifestation of identity alignment.
Identity alignment.
By permanently binding her legal and digital persona to her target's family name, the analysts argue she elevated the behavior from standard episodic harassment to a severe, premeditated cyberstalking campaign.
It's an escalation.
A massive one. It is interpreted as a psychological attempt to force a permanent, inescapable structural connection with the victim, invading his familial identity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The analysts actually created a mathematical model to quantify exactly how dangerous this specific situation is.
Yes, they didn't just guess or use vague terms.
Right. They built a framework called the Transnational Digital Harassment Severity Model. Let's break down how this formula actually works.
The formula calculates the overall threat severity by aggregating several specific variables. First, there is the clinical vulnerability factor of the targets.
Okay.
In this specific case, they input Alberto's pre-existing documented PTSD and trauma regression and combine it with his mother's acute physical collapse and wheelchair confinement.
So the baseline vulnerability of the targets is exceptionally high.
Yeah, very high. The next variable they add is the frequency and the reach of the public defamation campaigns. They measure the sustained activity across platforms like X and LinkedIn, noting the deliberate targeting of professional networks.
The high-trust spaces we talked about.
Exactly. Next, they factor in the intensity of the boundary violations and the interference with the target's broader life.
And then there's a multiplier in the equation, right?
Yes, there is a binary parameter representing the legal name change.
Binary parameter.
Yes. So the model dictates that if an attacker changes their legal name to mimic the target's surname without marriage or kinship, it acts as an extreme aggravating multiplier in the equation.
It basically turbocharges the severity score.
Precisely. When all these variables, vulnerability, frequency, boundary violation, and identity fixation are calculated together, the model empirically classifies the threat level of this specific campaign as extreme.
Extreme transnational digital harassment. Now, put yourself in that position for a moment. If you are facing an extreme threat, a campaign mathematically designed to destroy your career, your sanity, and your family's health, human nature screams at you to fight back.
Of course it does.
The instinct is to yell, to post your own angry tweets, to release screenshots, to defend yourself in the same public square where you are being attacked. But the dossier outlines that Alberto chose a completely different, highly disciplined path.
He did.
Let's examine his defensive strategy, which the documents title Radical Transparency and Data Over Drama.
Alberto's operational framework for defense was heavily guided by his criminal defense lawyer, Dr. Jorge Henderson. The core doctrine of their entire strategy was a concept called strategic non-reactivity.
Which means, instead of fighting back on social media, Alberto treated every single post, every email, and every extortive threat not as an insult to be answered, but as a cold diagnostic forensic artifact to be collected.
Yes.
He implemented an asymmetric digital defense. He fundamentally refused to enter into an unresolvable public social media feud.
Exactly. He institutionalized the dispute. He removed his participation from uncurated emotional dialogue and forced the entire conflict into a rigidly structured legal and forensic ecosystem.
Give me an example of that.
Well, a prime example of this methodology in action is the enforcement of the zero-contact policy.
Let's talk about the specific incident on May 19th, 2026, because it perfectly illustrates this.
It does.
The documents show that Alberto's legal team served Suvi with a formal, strict, written legal demand for zero communication. They drew a hard, documented boundary.
And the digital transmission logs verify that immediately following the receipt of that formal directive, Suvi dispatched 6 consecutive non-authorized email communications directly to Alberto.
6 of them, immediately.
Yeah.
Again, think about being in that situation. You're being stalked, your international career is being defamed, your mother is confined to a wheelchair because of the stress of this person's actions. You finally get your lawyer to issue a legally binding "do not contact me" order, and almost immediately your inbox dings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times.
It's infuriating.
The psychological restraint it must take to see those 6 emails sitting there from your harasser and just leave them completely unopened. I want to ask you, from a forensic perspective, why is that specific action, the disciplined choice to leave them unread, so legally powerful?
It is genuinely a masterclass in digital forensics and evidence preservation.
Really? Just by not opening them?
Yes. By purposefully leaving those 6 emails unopened, Alberto preserved the raw metadata and the cryptographic integrity of the email headers in their absolute original state.
For our listeners who might not be forensic experts, what actually happens if he gives in to curiosity and opens them?
If you open an email, you alter the metadata.
Just by clicking on it?
Just by clicking on it. The state of the data changes. A read receipt might be triggered and sent back to the sender. The timestamp of access is recorded on the receiving server.
Oh, I see.
In some cases, embedded tracking pixels are activated, logging your IP address and device information. If you reply, you initiate a two-way communication thread.
You essentially muddy the waters.
Exactly. By leaving them completely untouched, forensic investigators can extract the raw, unaltered server data. This proves immutably that the messages were sent by the attacker's origin server after the temporal boundary of the legal notice was established.
And under the law, particularly the European laws governing this case, what does that raw, unaltered data actually prove in court?
According to Italian jurisprudence, which is heavily referenced in the dossier, specifically the rulings of the Cassazione Penale, the Supreme Court of Cassation continuing to force contact after an explicit, documented zero-contact policy constitutes prima facie evidence of a crime.
Prima facie evidence, meaning?
Prima facie means the evidence is legally sufficient to prove a fact or establish a presumption unless disproved or rebutted.
Wow.
In this context, it proves an intent to inflict psychological distress. It establishes a pattern of persistent, unwanted harassment without muddying the waters with a two-way argument. Alberto didn't reply. He didn't argue. He just stood still and let her build the mathematical cage of evidence around herself.
The Independent Conflict Analysis Report actually conducts a comparative evaluation of the behavioral maturity of the two actors based entirely on these actions, right?
It does. It explicitly contrasts Alberto's high structural maturity with Suvi's procedural and emotional immaturity.
And how do they define his high structural maturity?
The assessment notes that Alberto, despite being under intense, chronic emotional stress and trauma regression, consistently rejected reckless impulses.
Right.
He systematically insulated his family. He utilized formal state protocols. He took absolute accountability for the financial transaction by demanding the proper AML routing data.
Which she wouldn't give.
Exactly. And he showed complete deference to the rule of law and institutional processes.
And on the flip side,
Conversely, the report states Suvi's actions reveal a profound lack of emotional legal maturity. She waged a complex legal dispute through public internet smears. She crossed severe extortive boundaries regarding his family. She flagrantly and repeatedly violated the formal zero-contact directive, and she evasively defied standard international banking compliance.
it's quite the list.
The clinical analysts conclude she remained trapped in an unproductive, emotionally driven loop of public retaliation, completely blind to the permanent, structural legal liabilities she was generating for herself.
And those legal liabilities are massive. Because while Alberto was sitting there silently preserving metadata and enduring the public attacks, his legal team was meticulously building a multi-state legal apparatus.
It's incredible to see it all come together.
This brings us to the culmination of the conflict, where the forensic trap finally snaps shut.
The sheer scale and scope of the legal detonation activated against Suvi and her ex-husband is staggering. It spans across 3 different sovereign jurisdictions: Italy, Uruguay, and Belgium.
3 different countries.
Yes, the dossier outlines 3 distinct legal tracks that were simultaneously activated.
Let's break those down, starting with the Italian track. Why Italy?
Well, the documents show Alberto holds Italian citizenship alongside his Uruguayan nationality, which grants him the full protection of the Italian legal system.
Okay, that makes sense.
The files show his team filed extensive, heavily documented complaints with the Garante per la Protezione dei Dati Personali, the Italian Data Protection Authority in Rome. We see active state-level investigations operating under specific administrative protocol numbers, such as PROTUT 080-77426.
And beyond the Data Protection Authority, they also filed criminal dossier, right?
Yes, comprehensive criminal dossiers with the Polizia Postale, the Italian Postal and Communications Police who handle cybercrime.
And these aren't just civil suits.
No, these filings are not mere civil complaints. They are criminal actions targeting specific, severe articles of the Italian Penal Code, namely Article 612bis, which covers atti persecutori or cyberstalking, and Article 595, Paragraph 3, which covers diffamazione aggravata or aggravated defamation via internet platforms.
Aggravated defamation. Does the internet part make it worse?
Yes, it carries enhanced penalties because the internet allows for the rapid, uncontrollable spread of the defamatory material.
Got it. Then there is the second track, the Belgian or family law track. Remember the ex-husband, Pekka, allegedly smuggling the 11-year-old undocumented child across the border during a terror threat?
Event A.
Right. Event A, Alberto's team didn't just ignore that as background noise. They formalized the introduction of child subtraction logs regarding Pekka Kodiranta under Belgian law, specifically referencing Article 574bis.
They systematically forwarded the certified behavioral disparity logs, the documents detailing the unauthorized border transit, and Suvi's passive complicity directly to the relevant family and criminal authorities in Brussels.
Which is just a brilliant strategic move.
It is. And within this Belgian track, they employed a fascinating and aggressive legal strategy called solidary liability, which in the legal text is referred to as capienza patrimoniale.
I need you to explain that concept because when I read it in the source material, it sounded like an absolute financial checkmate. How does solidary liability work in this context?
The legal memos note that the primary respondent, Suvi, presented low financial liquidity. She didn't have significant assets to seize. Okay.
However, her ex-husband, Pekka, a former police officer with a steady income, was forensically identified in the logs as a primary source who originally generated and transmitted some of the defamatory slurs that Suvi later weaponized.
Oh.
Because he contributed to the origin of the defamation, Alberto's legal team issued formal notices of co-authorship and civil liability directly to him.
So, because he helped light the match, they're holding him responsible for the fire.
Exactly. They linked the financial damages of the defamation campaign directly to his verified asset capacity, specifically his EU salary and his liquid savings.
Wow.
By establishing solidary liability, they made him legally and financially liable for the commercial destruction caused by the campaign, regardless of Suvi's inability to pay.
Wow. If you help spread the lie, your bank account pays for the damage.
Precisely.
Which leads directly into the third and final track, the civil and corporate track. The documents show Alberto formalized a massive civil lawsuit.
The files contain a formalized, heavily documented USD $335,000 civil claim.
$335,000, that is not a small number. No, and this figure isn't arbitrary. It is calculated based on moral damages, reputational harm, the verifiable loss of international cybersecurity consulting earnings, and the comprehensive ongoing medical outlays tied to his mother's physical collapse.
But the most immediate, brutal action outlined on this track involves Suvi's current employment, doesn't it?
Yes. The legal team enacted a structured plan to process the direct delivery of the fully certified cyber harassment dossier to Suvi's corporate HR department and their internal compliance board, recommending immediate termination with cause. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it exposes the fatal underlying flaw in the attacker's mindset.
What do you mean?
The strategic summary in the forensic files outlines what they call the attacker's illusion. This is the psychological belief that because I am posting these attacks from another country, I am out of reach, and therefore I am legally safe.
Ah, I see. But the forensic and legal reality they ran into is a principle called the theory of ubiquity.
Precisely. The theory of ubiquity dictates that in matters of digital crime and defamation, legal jurisdiction attaches wherever the damage is felt by the victim.
Right.
The attacker might be sitting comfortably behind a keyboard in Brussels, Belgium, but if their actions destroy the commercial reputation and family health of an Uruguayan Italian citizen operating globally, the legal systems of both Uruguay and Italy have full, absolute jurisdictional authority to investigate, prosecute, and punish. The internet is not a borderless shield. It is a globally connected crime scene.
So let's look at the forecasted worst-case scenario for Suvi, as it is rigidly and clinically outlined in the final legal memos prepared by Dr. Henderson.
Yeah.
What is she actually legally facing if she doesn't issue a total retraction and comply with the demands?
The dimensional forecast matrix provided in the documents is remarkably bleak.
Let's hear it.
First, she faces the prospect of consecutive prison sentences. By mathematically combining the maximum bounds of her primary offenses under Italian law, which is up to 6.5 years for aggravated stalking, up to 3 years for aggravated defamation, and potential additional time for fabricating false police reports, she faces a cumulative potential threshold of up to 15.5 years of consecutive incarceration.
15.5 years. Let that sink in. For sending tweets and unopened emails.
Because the offenses carry potential custodial sentences that exceed the necessary legal minimums, Italian prosecutors have the authority to request the activation of a European arrest warrant or an EAW.
And the forensic files also mention the activation of SI's border alerts. What does that mean for her day-to-day life?
The SIS is the Schengen Information System, a highly secure database used by European countries. An active Italian prosecutor's border flag would trigger an SS alert across the network.
And
Practically, this means she would face immediate detention and questioning at any international border checkpoint, airport immigration line, or even during a routine traffic stop within the EU. She would be effectively stripped of the freedom of cross-border movement.
And professionally.
Yeah.
How does the corporate track impact her?
Immediate career invalidation. The delivery of the certified forensic evidence of multi-jurisdictional digital stalking to her employer's global compliance team would trigger standard corporate policy provisions regarding off-duty criminal misconduct and reputational risk.
So she's fired.
The legal forecast projects summary termination with cause and permanent exclusion from the corporate and technological sector, as she would be flagged as an insider threat.
Not to mention the total financial ruin from the $335,000 civil lawsuit. And strategically, the legal offset of those damages would automatically wipe out any original debt Alberto owed her, legally nullifying her initial complaint.
Correct.
And the final piece of the worst-case scenario, the total dismantling of her ex-husband's liberty. By forcing Alberto's team to escalate, Pekka faces formal indictment as a co-defendant for defamation and financial liability, alongside simultaneous criminal prosecution by Belgian authorities for international parental child abduction, which again carries 5 to 10 years of mandatory imprisonment.
All of this catastrophic consequence flowing entirely from an inability to manage displaced aggression over a 5-minute phone boundary and a stubborn refusal to provide standard banking documents.
Yeah, we have to contrast that nightmare scenario with the forecasted outcome for Alberto Hill, the target of the attack.
For Alberto, the forecast projects complete objective legal exoneration. He faces zero criminal exposure because the exhaustive investigations, the preserved metadata, and the clean toxicology labs demonstrate immutably that the allegations were completely fabricated.
And reputationally, can a cybersecurity expert recover from being publicly branded a drug addict and a scammer?
The forecast projects full reputational recovery. The judicial injunctions force the permanent, legally mandated removal of the defamatory material from the platforms.
Right.
The subsequent deployment of a fact-backed, legally verified public press release serves as an objective public vindication. His market standing, backed by historical industry trust from organizations like the Chaos Computer Club, is projected to experience an immediate rebound, as his defense strategy actually showcased his deep expertise in digital forensics.
He literally utilized his foundational philosophy of radical transparency to survive a digital execution.
He did.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at what seemed like a dispute between two people, but it evolved into an absolute masterclass on the architecture of asymmetric digital defense. We journeyed from a minor boundary dispute on a phone call to a transnational legal war involving Interpol examiners, anti-money laundering laws, and European arrest warrants.
It fundamentally proves that the internet is not a lawless vacuum.
No, it's not.
The actions you take in high-trust digital spaces, the accusations you make, the relational boundaries you violate, the metadata you generate, have severe, borderless, real-world consequences. You cannot separate your digital conduct from your physical, legal reality.
And that brings us back to that X-ray machine metaphor we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. When a bone is broken, the X-ray cuts through the noise and shows the undeniable truth.
Exactly.
In the digital world, the X-ray is the metadata. It's the cryptographic keys in an unopened email header, the clinical lab results, the compliance logs tracking a blocked bank wire. And that leaves us with a chilling consideration for you to mull over as we end today's analysis.
We live in an era where domestic disputes and displaced aggression can be instantly weaponized on a global scale.
Exactly. So think about this. The most dangerous weapon an adversary can use against you today might not be a sophisticated ransomware hack or a zero-day exploit. It might just be your own hijacked reputation. If your digital identity was dragged into a courtroom tomorrow and placed on trial for the whole world to see, would your forensic metadata tell the objective truth, or would it tell the story your attacker wrote for you?